Hello and welcome to the Art Department podcast, episode 55. It's Emmanuel Shiu in San Francisco and myself, Urschel, here in Singapore. Today we're talking about a topic that is kind of an extension of something we talked before. It's about the general topic of burnout, the general topic of being unhappy with kind of maybe your work or your art, or there's something that's kind of bugging you. And we've been toying with this idea for quite a while, and it's of course something that has some personal relevance, but of course it also has, I think, wider implication, and it's almost like a disease in society almost. And generally it's we actually didn't know about this, but it's actually classified as an addiction. And before we tell you what it's about, and you hopefully haven't read the title yet of this video.
Of course they have.
Come on. But we wanted to kind of lead into this with some questions that you might want to ask yourself. And it's questions like, are you constantly thinking and obsessing about work? Do you feel guilty when you don't have your stylus in your hand, when you're not sitting in front of the computer? Do you have like anxiety all the time that, I don't know, you didn't respond fast enough to a client, that you can't leave any email in or any message on your messenger unanswered for more than 5 seconds? And you have this constant like feel of like you're missing out, that you didn't make millions of dollars in NFT money, or you're very like jealous of other people's achievements, that, oh my gosh, they worked on that movie and they did this game and I'm not doing anything. If you have any of these kind of issues, then maybe it's time to think about and ask yourself, are you maybe a workaholic? And it's, I think, and then for myself, I think workaholic never really had like a bad connotation, to be honest. I don't know about you, but I felt like it was like, oh, it's like, hey, if I'm a workaholic, that's good, right? I make a lot of money, I do a lot of work. But I think there comes a point when I think your work attitude and how much you work and generally how you see work has, I think, implications for your health, for your psyche, and you can find yourself, I think, very quickly in a downward spiral.
Yeah.
So maybe now that we kind of led into this, and hopefully some of you in the audience are kind of thinking about it, and I don't know if you can answer any of these questions that we just asked with a yes, then maybe it's a good thing that you dialed into this, that you turned on this podcast, and maybe you should stay on. Do we want to talk first maybe a bit about what it is? What is workaholism?
Well, I mean, to just piggyback off of what you said real quick, I think a lot of people would probably say yes to some form of those questions that we asked. But I think the bigger thing is that I think a lot of people would be like, I said yes, but that's normal. And they don't even realize that there's a problem there, really. And it's this problem that it's this underlying thing that nobody seems to think it's a problem, because they, it's normal. It's how it is, And I think we're, really want to put a little bit of a spotlight on the issue, right, and see, using us as test cases to show you our lives and whether that looks like workaholism or not, and what you can kind of do about it. Maybe, just to even identify some of these things. So I think it's important, because I think a lot of people will be like, yeah, I'm like that, but hey, that's okay, because there's no big deal, until they realize that maybe it's a bigger deal than they thought. But let's get started.
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of lead into it with generally thinking about what is workaholism, right? I mean, I think the first time that this term came up, and just as a disclaimer here, right? We are not medical professionals. We don't have any doctor titles. We don't claim that this information is 100% vetted and everything. We've done our research. We've read books. We've asked people who know more about this than us. And of course, this comes with a good dose of kind of just our own opinions and experiences. So please take everything that we say with a grain of salt. We're trying to kind of make a case for that this is a problem. And again, like Emmanuel said, what we can do about it. But again, we're open for this to be a two-way kind of or three-way discussion between Emmanuel, myself, and the audience, right? So if you have more information about this, if you have more experiences, then please do share them.
And just so you know, if anybody wants to really go maybe even a deeper dive, just say it in the comments, and you know, we can see what we can do, you know.
Sure.
For basically any episode, right? I mean, if you want deeper dives, because I mean, we'd had Dr. Jody on before about mental health. I don't see any reason why, if this is something of interest, to go deeper into it, to get a professional on. Maybe that's a possibility, but
sure.
Write in the comments if that's something that you want. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. So yeah, back to the program, right? In that sense. So I mean, going back to the 70s, that's kind of the first time when the word workaholic came up and was kind of specified as kind of an uncontrollable need to work all the time, and it was also classified as an addiction. And I mean, it's kind of the thing, it's kind of a bit self-explanatory, right? That it's like this compulsive drive to work all the time, to work hard, to think about work constantly, and that feeling of guilt when you don't work, right? Whether or not that work you're doing is productive or not. But you have that urge, right? You need that feeling of like ticking your task list off and getting things done and feeling productive, and you're guilty and you don't feel restless if you're not doing that, right? Like any time you're like idling, it feels like you're not being a worthwhile member of society, right? And yeah, that's kind of the general definition of it. Maybe you should talk a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's funny because it, you know, from where it came, you know, I mean, I think this has been sort of, maybe that's when it was coined, the terms and stuff like that. But I'll say that this idea of thinking definitely went was, you know, happening way before that. But I think, you know, it's interesting because each generation brings with it, you know, and when you talk about the 70s, I'm talking about my father's generation, you know, or even before that, and the mentality of work, and that mentality of work gets instilled in me, right, when I grow up, because he's instilling those philosophies, right, and then now I'm, you know, so it's very important to know that where it came from, and probably he had, you know, from his father, so. You know, all this stuff gets passed down.
Yeah.
Know?
I mean, that's kind of the trickiness. And then we kind of can talk about, I mean, where does this come from, right? Where does this thinking come from? And I mean, it's interesting that it came up in the early 70s, which definitely had to do with, I think, like post-war kind of rebuilding of societies and a lot of the economic miracles, right? In Europe, those happened in the 60s, right? And I'm sure there is a tight relationship between when it was coined and the time it came out of, right? And like you said, it existed definitely before, but I think as a problem in society, it was definitely a child of its time. And but I find it interesting because I think for all these people, or for all the people that say they're workaholics, or I think there's on the one hand, I think a personal history and a personal kind of reason for why people turn into workaholics, and on the other hand, there's also the issue like why, like if it's so tightly connected to each person's history, why is it such a problem in society on a larger scale, right? And I think we can maybe go into each of these separately, right? Maybe let's talk a bit about maybe society first, right? I mean, definitely in our industry, right? And definitely in our industry, it's generally like, how do I say, like when I, for example, went into like freelancing and in this industry, right, it was kind of made clear from the very beginning, even from the point of like getting education for this industry, that working long hours is kind of the thing to do. And it's not even like for myself, like before I went to like FCD, it was not I wasn't a workaholic, honestly. Like I put in my time, but I made always sure that I work regular hours for anything. But then when I entered FCD with the explicit kind of goal to become a concept artist, like it was made clear from like day one that like absolute dedication and like 20-hour days in this school are the norm. It's the new normal. And that and there was not like said that, oh, we're just doing that because it's a shorter program, or we're doing that just because. It's like, oh, this is to prepare you for the industry, because that's how it is, right? And then if you're getting taught with that mindset from the teacher's side, you kind of adopt that mindset, I think, very quickly. And then generally, like if you look at the kind of messaging that is perpetuated from the very senior artists, from the very like famous artists online, they all have the same story that like, oh yeah, for many years I had to like give up everything and sleep under the desk and work like 20-hour days because that's what it took. And they wear that as kind of like a badge of honor. Maybe not some of them, but maybe not all of them, but some of them, I think.
Well, let me ask you, was that you?
What do you mean? Like, as somebody who's telling people to do that? Did you ever wear it as
a badge of honor? And
in the beginning, definitely. I was like, because you can say that, oh, like I did that, right? You didn't, and haha, like I was like, I mean, you don't say that like you don't say that to somebody's face, but that's kind of what your thinking is. No, it's like I made it, and because I was stronger than you, like I didn't fall asleep at 2 a.m. for like the fifth day straight or whatever, right? And then you don't even realize like that what you're saying is completely crazy, right? But I mean, that's kind of like the attitude that is kind of being perpetuated within the artist community, right? And you look up to people who are like, oh my God, he can work so long, and wow, amazing. Of course, on the other hand, right, like employers, I'm sure that every employer wants to have an employee who is willing to give everything, right? Like, why would you get somebody who's like, yeah, I work 9 to 5, I have kids, and yeah, weekends I don't do that. Whereas somebody else like, yeah, I'm totally fine. Like, you can make me, like, I'm totally hyped up. I work whenever you want, right? I mean, even to a degree where in different countries, like different policies exist, or different kind of unwritten rules of like that you work from like the China's 996 policy, or the like from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days. It's
997 actually.
997, right? But I mean, they're coming down now, right? And then, but not to single out any country here, right? There's other societies where it's kind of like the thing that like you can't leave before your boss leaves, or like you have to go like on like company drinking like 3 times a week or whatever, right? Like all these kind of things that kind of like chain you to work, and kind of you're not able to kind of switch off, and I think there's an issue here where, again, this is like the existence of overtime pay, I think is in itself like a really weird thing, where it's rewarded that you work more, right?
Well, you know,
and a lot of times this doesn't even exist, right?
I can tell you a quick story about overtime. you know, and you know, I have it written down now, you know, when you were talking, which I definitely want to talk about the pride. You know, there's so much pride in the fact that I'm working late, I'm working hard. See, I'm making money. Like that's what you tell your spouse. That's what you tell your fellow, you know, people or called colleagues. And for a longest time, I think I got sucked into that because of, you know, my dad, which we'll get into. But the thing is, I used to hear this a lot. It's like, and this came from a lot of like well-known artists, right? You listen to their DVDs or their interviews or whatever, and they will say, well, you know, my dad taught me that if you do a painting every day, then you're going to be more prepared than the person who doesn't do that. So you're automatically going, well, I got to just go nuts. You know, that's the mentality, right? But nobody's saying like, hey, if you have the right mindset, you'll actually do a better painting. Yeah, you'll have a painting every day, but it won't be very good. And it's just amazing because when I went to the orphanage, which was my first film job, I went in there and I already was pushing against it because they were not paying overtime. And people were still working till 12 at night.
Right.
Later than that. And it was like the mentality of, well, you know, this is what's expected of you. And if you don't do it, you're in trouble. And I remember I was in, you know, my colleague's office and saying, what are they going to do to me? I'm working for free. And everybody was still there. And I was like, screw this, I'm out. I was really upset, you know, and I was like, this can't be right. You know, like I was already getting burned out, you know, doing that. And I had already done it at a previous job at, you know, and at a game. And I was like working till 3-4 in the morning and it was like expected of you. And nobody saw any problem with it. It's just hardworking, you know, it's, you know, the culture is like, well, you know, you make money, you've got to work hard. Right. And I didn't realize how much of that was an addiction and why I didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew I wasn't happy. So yeah, I mean, we should get into that for sure, but I was just going to say, like, everything you're saying, I'm pretty much like, there's like definite points in my life. And I wonder, do you have stuff like that? Like, did you get to a place where like you expected all this stuff?
I mean, to be honest, in freelancing more so than in regular jobs, right? I mean, there were companies where they're making sure that everything has to 9 to 5 and then you're done, and they're kind of pushing you towards keeping healthy hours, whereas there's other companies who completely ignore that, and where if you're the first to leave, if you get up at 7 p.m. or whatever, like there nobody else is even looking up from their screen. It's like normal behavior, and that's also one of the big points that we're going to touch on later, that if you live in an environment where that is normal, you do not realize that it's wrong, and that's very tricky, right? But maybe before we get into that, I wanted to just kind of touch on a little bit again, that workaholism also has kind of its roots in, again, what you said with our fathers, with our like hero figures, like what the kind of life they lived, and without, maybe it was not even intentional for them to pass on these traits to us, but because we see our role models behave this way, we automatically internalize these behaviors, right? So I think if you have parents who are workaholics, right, then you're more likely than not to turn out one yourself, right? There's this whole thing about, again, we're posting also the links to these books that we read on these, and the articles, we'll post them so you can kind of read up on them as well, right? But so what I read is that the harder it is to win your parents' approval, whether it is through like again, hard work, like good grades, right? You enter university entrance exams, the kind of jobs you score, right? If you need to work hard every single time to win your parents' approval, because that's all a kid wants to do, right? It wants to get approval from their parents. It wants to be loved. And if you have to work incredibly hard for that, in order to get that, it's like, oh, if you have straight A's, I'm going to bring you to McDonald's or whatever. Then that creates a very unhealthy relationship with the child towards kind of work in that sense, right? Whereas apparently kids who were shown unconditional love by their parents, this kind of trait is less prominent, right? And because the kids will unconsciously make the same choices as their parents, right? Or like there's also like the feeling of like inferiority, right? There was a story that I read that like a son of a mother was like he had a very disturbed relationship to his aunt. His aunt's family, so his mother's sister, was very rich, and they always looked down on his family, and he always felt very bad that his aunt would treat his mother like really badly, and always would really like make it clear that she was like lower than her, and in order to kind of like pay her back, in order to like really show her that like she's wrong, and he tried very hard to become rich, and well, he became rich in the end, but at a very high cost. Like he hated his work. He was very stressed. He was sick. He had a very disturbed relationship to his own family, and it took some major kind of internalization and like self-reflection to realize that he was living in constant fear of being looked down upon, right? This kind of like social status game. And I think again, these are just to show that there are several different like causes in each person's, I think, history, family history, or how they grew up, that can contribute to making somebody into a workaholic, or somebody having somebody that somebody has a very disturbed relationship to the work they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of we've all heard the stories, right? Like I think we've all heard the stories of the one you said, it's definitely a little bit more unique in the,
of course.
Yeah, but I mean, I think like I told you today, I was listening to another TED Talk where this AI scientist / programmer was just basically a person neglecting everything around him because he felt the need to achieve and to make money, and doing all that, and then at the cost of what? His health. He got cancer, and at the cost of his father not really knowing him and dying, and he can't go back to do anything about it, things like that. And I think it's good to know that a plethora of problems can cause this, when you're young. But the main thing is to recognize, hey, is there something unhealthy happening here? And if the answer is no, awesome, right? But I think we go into the subject of burnout so many times on so many episodes that for me, it kind of rang a bell. Like, right. Wait a minute, workaholism has a lot to do with why I'm burning out. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those stories around, and I think we will share our story, for better or for worse. You can see sort of how I kind of am working to overcome it, and of course, I want to hear Jan's story. And
I shared a little bit of it already. I mean, do you want to go into your story right now, or do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, like, story is simple. I mean, it's like another one of this we're talking about. It's just basically I never got that approval. I basically, when I was young, I was called lazy. I was called like you gotta work at things, and like you don't work hard enough. And my dad basically just wrote me off. I mean, he just wrote me off. He just said, "Oh, you're useless." And I was pretty useless as a student. I mean, I can't lie. But I used to go just have fun and party and do all that. But at some point, I was trying to get approval so badly that and I never got it. I was never able to get any part of it. That when I graduated from art school, I said to myself, okay, you're not a kid anymore. Like, and dad says you need to do this in order to be successful, and I need to show him. And I felt like for my whole life, I've been trying to show him, to get him to be, proud of me, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You're just trying to get approval. And I worked, that first job, I worked basically, I'd say probably 20 hours a day. And every day, including Sunday. And I was proud of it. I was like, hey, look, finally, I'm doing what dad would be proud of me, for this. And in the end, that, this is where all the burnout already started happening before I even really found what I enjoyed to do. But this was all at jobs. I mean, I don't know of any job that told me, hey, why don't you go home? Like, no job, basically. So not only was I reinforced like by my needing to be have approval from dad, it was like the job itself, your boss was not telling you to go home. It was telling you to stay, basically. Like, you got all this work, hey, if you really care, you stay. I mean, and you feel guilty and I better stay, like, you keep yourself there, right? I mean, that's what you do. And I would work for free, essentially. I mean, if you work 16 hours a day, I was probably getting paid for half of that.
Exactly.
And I was still working, and that was pretty much, and I thought, now freelance, I'm my own boss. It got even worse when it's freelance, because now you're picking up the phone in the middle of the night. Now you're replying emails in the middle of the night, thinking, I'm just being professional. That's the furthest thing from being professional. And then I'm burning out. I'm needing all these time off, and I'm wondering to myself, it's just because I'm doing other people's vision. That's my excuse, right? I mean, I don't have a problem. I'm not addicted. I'm not nothing. I don't have a problem, and I'm wondering, why am I getting burned out all the time? And this, from my wife, she's just saying, hey, I didn't want to say anything, but you're kind of like a workaholic, and you have this problem. And to her, it was just like, I'm getting a lot better, but I was answering emails in the weekend. I was feeling like I had to work hard. And the biggest problem is this: I was and I am an educator. That's the problem, because I now am pushing that philosophy onto the students. I remember back, in my Sony days when I was teaching, and I would say, you got to work hard. You got to show me how hard. And you got to, you got to pump and like do extra, if you're done with this and you have time left and you do more, that was me to an extreme. So if I'm telling that person to do that, then that person learns that, and then they continue thinking it's nothing wrong, right? And then they'll teach whoever they teach to do that. And that's why it all perpetuates, because everyone's teaching hard work, Like, I gotta say, like, even not so long ago, like a year ago, I was still talking about hard work. Although I start shifting, right? Maybe it's not so good. Maybe you need more free time. I was starting to change my thinking. But now, especially when we're researching this, I was like, something's got to change. Even in me, because I'm still the kind of guy who's like, I better reply this. And my wife's like, you're eating. How about you just finish your food? Because she knows I may not like reply, because she knows I'm thinking about it. And I know I'm thinking about it, because I'm going, yeah. Like, to the point of like stopping the meal. And, that's not healthy to do that. I mean, you got to just shut off. And then, of course, the person you're with thinks, well, man, come on, we spend time eating, and now your mind's on something else. So I mean, for me, I'm constantly trying to. Now I've admitted finally that I have an issue. That's not healthy, and I'm trying to find ways to combat and turn it around so that I can not be that way anymore. It's just like, I used to smoke, many, many years ago. And I just said, I got to quit. It's not good for me. It's the same thing. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell. I mean, you can ask questions, but you can also go into yours.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it took a long time to.
I mean, you don't have to say that you have any problem either.
Oh, no.
Because I think you're quite different from me.
Yeah, I'm very different. I'm just trying to. I mean, I can tell you some bits and pieces that I kind of put together in the end, like over my life, and kind of. I think there's an issue. I think I have a similar issue like that you have in the end, but maybe a different story how I got there.
Well, hold on. Let me just preface this because, I'm sort of the poster child of workaholism. So because I mean everything fits right in, what it is, but. I think when it came to you, I always thought that you weren't because you know how to shut off.
Yeah.
Because, on the weekends, you're like, you don't even reply my text. And I'm like, I have actually a lot of respect for that because I'm like,
yeah,
because I would.
But that wasn't always that way. So
tell me.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, just kind of, I have episodes here and there from again, my childhood and growing up. And it's interesting, like, because my dad was working a lot, not necessarily like having super high expectations, I think, in terms of, I don't know, following his footsteps or having to work hard or whatever. My mom was the opposite. She was like a stay-at-home mom for most of the time. And I always was very bad in school, like very mediocre, always kind of like C's and D's and kind of just getting through. But I remember from my childhood that I had this, like all my friends had like big houses, the coolest toys, like everything was like bigger and better than for what I had. I mean, not that I had like a bad childhood. We were not poor or anything, but I don't know. I had to like share a room with my brother throughout the entire, basically the entire time through my high school, which I of course didn't like, right? And then you see other kids having like huge houses and everything. So that I think always there's that kind of like inbuilt jealousy that, oh my gosh, they always have more. But like I said before, like I never really like worked crazy hard until I think I hit FCD. I mean, there were times in my graphic design days where I definitely worked more than like the kind of 9 to 5, but it was never in a really like in a high stress environment or whatever. And there was I got paid by the hour, so there was no like, it was like, okay, if I work 2 more hours and the work is there, then I can buy that toy, right? But then FCD really changed everything. And I think it also was a change in mindset where before everything I thought was like, oh, you got to have talent, right? You got to have talent to become great, and you got to have talent to become a great concept artist or whatever. Like that direct relationship between like focused study and hard work and a better outcome was not a given for me. But of course then when I came out of FCD, and then I could see that like I was getting like way better than I ever thought I could be, and only through hard work, right? I think that kind of instilled a very, very problematic relationship between those two. In the beginning, it was all fun because you're younger, you have a lot of like passion. We're going to talk about that in a bit. So you kind of don't see the problem kind of creeping up. But then I think at some point, I mean, there were definitely these times when I was younger where like, I work all through the weekend. I do my day job and then I go home. I work more until like midnight or longer, and then on the weekends I also work all the time just to finish all the freelance work that I was getting on the side. And then, yeah, if you become freelancer, right, and especially in a time zone that is completely off with Europe and LA, you kind of naturally adapt to your client's time. And then like there were times where like I remember that it was when I was working on some Star Wars movie, and I was actually like, we were supposed to have my wife and I were supposed to go on a vacation to Paris, and I was like, I can do everything. I can do everything. So I started the job in Singapore, and then, well, the job didn't stop, and I didn't even think about telling anybody on the like my art director Doug Chang. I didn't even think about telling him that I'm going to Paris on vacation, but like I didn't even tell him. Like it didn't even. I thought that if I say that, I would be off the movie. And so, well, we went to Paris. Luckily, we were staying with a friend, so my wife was like spending time with her friend in Paris, going out, and I was sitting in like a little apartment in Paris, like on my laptop, working on Star Wars, and so I could still go out. I was working like late at night, and then I was doing like conference calls with the team, like at 4 a.m. or whatever in Paris, and like at that point in time, I thought that's what you do, not realizing that's like now what I'm saying is like, what the hell was I thinking, right? And I was so deep into that thinking, it's like that's cool, right? I'm living the dream here, right? Haha.
And I'm on Star Wars.
Yeah, and I'm like I didn't even realize that how screwed up that was. And of course, like it took at some point, like the kids came, I took some time off. Then there was definitely no more weekend work, just because having kids is a lot of work. And luckily that stuck with me, right? It's not like once the kids were easier to handle, I went back to weekend work or whatever. I mean, also a little bit more experience and a bit more seniority it's easier to kind of push through your kind of terms of the deal to say like, I work from then to then, you get 8 hours a day, I don't do weekends. But that until recently, I still have had that issue of like, I need to answer any email like the second it comes in, right? And making sure that the ball keeps rolling like over the weekends, right? And that's really bad. I mean, for me, the turning point, I think, at some point came when because not every art director is nice, right? There are some that they expect you to, and they don't even say it, but they just expect you to work 24/7. And when whatever goes on at work kind of dominates your thinking and dominates and changes the kind of person you are, and kind of when you really notice the deteriorating relationships between you and your wife, you and your husband, you and your kids, and when you suddenly become like not good to be around anymore, then you do need to check, first of all, what's going on in the first place, and if it has a strong relationship to what you experience at work, then there's definitely an issue. I mean, also looking back, kind of, I think I have a very strong attitude that you as a husband, you kind of have to be the breadwinner, because that was what my dad always was, and he kind of didn't want my mom to go back to work too early, because he said, I can do it all, right? And then you get that idea that the best way that you can contribute to your family's happiness is by working a lot and making a lot of money, right? When of course that's not the case, right? Money is great if you can live a worry-free life, right? But of course you need to spend, like, sometimes the time is better spent that you go out with your kids to the playground rather than you sitting at home and making these extra bucks, right? And that's something I really have difficulties with, and had difficulties with for a long time, I think, to make that decision of like, okay, now it's enough. Like I can do work a little bit later, but I need to spend that time with the kids face to face right now, right? And also I think, I mean, money is not everything, right? But I don't know, this kind of like that thinking. I think there was also that feeling of like, okay, if you compare work and child rearing, work is easier. I will say that again and again. Raising kids is a lot more hard work than the actual like bloody like concept work or whatever. But
I just want to.
Then you use.
I want
one
to
last
actually
point.
ask you a question.
One last point
Yeah.
before you can jump
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
because
no,
then I'm
absolutely.
done. Is that I think there's an element that men, I think especially, use work as an excuse or an escape from, like, it doesn't have to be kids. It doesn't have to be kids, but like bigger issues. I don't know if they're health related or finance related or whatever, right? There's always things that like you should rather be doing, but well, you just drown yourself in work, so you still look productive. You have an excuse, you have an escape, and you can just do that. And then you think nobody can blame you for not attending to the other issues, right? But anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to say, right? So over to you.
I mean, the reason I wanted to interrupt you, and sorry for that, but because when you talk about child rearing, I thought that was really interesting, because I was just like, well, what about mothers? Are they workaholics? Because they don't have a choice, and that is rough, man. Like you're not even, they are kind of like a 24-hour. You want to talk 997? They're 24/7. And what are they? I mean, that's obviously something for another discussion, but I really dig what you said about the escape from, you could be escape, because I won't name who, but I know of a couple, and I know the husband constantly, I would have called him a workaholic, right? Because as soon as the last bite of food is done, he's back at the computer, right? Any chance you get, like, he's never with the family preparing the meal. He's never with, like, nothing. He's just like, he comes out to eat and he goes back to the thing. And I'm like, I used to say workaholic, right? He's a workaholic, but he's actually, like you said, there's a deeper problem. He's actually escaping. Like, that's his safe place. Like, he doesn't want that social interaction. Something was wrong there. And later on, comes to find out that the relationship between the husband and wife was there. That was the problem. So that's interesting what you were saying. The other thing, that I think is interesting, because I talked to my friend John Guzzi, was different generations. And he said, oh my God, like, I'm so sick of working for people who are from, let's say, my generation, who keeps shoving the whole, you gotta work hard, to achieve, and you're not working hard enough, and the newer generation is actually more, they you might call them, like, a lot of people call them entitled, but I don't think so. I think they're just like, hey, my time is actually, it's important to spend it wisely, because they've been kind of taught that. But the problem is, a lot of the junior people now are having a hard time, because they don't know how, like, we have seniority, so we can actually start unraveling ourselves and saying, okay, we don't want to work too much now, we got to do this, do that, and we generally have a little more control because we have seniority. But what about the junior person that coming out now, especially from a younger generation? They're having even harder time, because they're like, you're not even allowing me to live life. You're just saying, because from, let's say somebody like me that hasn't realized I'm a workaholic, I'd be like, absolutely. I'd be like, how vested are you in the project? All this bullshit, right? Like, how much do you care? But, I'm actually, what I'm doing is I'm pushing my workaholic attitudes, asking you to, like, it's like, I'm smoking crack, you got to smoke crack too. So if you don't do that, then you're not like me, and therefore you're not going to have a longevity in the company. They feel like they need to do that, so now they're forced into doing it, and they have to work hard or else. And I guess my question to you is, what do you think about that? And do you think there's, I mean, at this moment, I'm not sure what a solution to that would be, because those people do exist.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, because, if you were the junior person, do you say, well, I'm not going to do that, because that's going to piss your boss off, right?
Definitely. I mean, I'm the best thing we can do that if we are in that position that we are the boss, right? Like we need to like be open, I think, to what the juniors have to say, right? We can't assume that we know everything, and yeah, there's a generational divide, definitely.
That's the thing, is like you can't expect the addicted person just to automatically realize. So I think for the junior person, they're saying, well, look, for me to make it into this industry, I kind of have to do that. And you're kind of already killing yourself before you get started, right? You're hurting yourself. Like even in art school, like I've been teaching and I can see the stress the students are in. They are already learning to be workaholics because guess what? They 24/7 they're working. They're going crazy at school. I mean, depending on the school, obviously, but on a lot of schools, the expectations are so high. I mean, I don't know, how was it at FZD?
Oh yeah, but I mean, crazy. I mean, you got so
you're already taught that that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's the normal. You know? That's the expectation, right? That they give you so much homework that if you work about 20 hours a day and sometimes work through the night, you'll get it done, right? But anything less than that, it's not going to work.
So I mean, how can they succeed if they are already taught in school to do that? I mean, I know
most
that
of the people fail. Most of the people will not end up in the industry. That's how simple.
And
it
the
is.
ones that do are probably super resilient, but they'll end up
but
maybe really hurting themselves.
I mean,
I have meetings with the students where they're like, their hair is completely disheveled. They're like,
but that's kind
like
of
zombies.
Isn't that the typical image of an art student you have? No, it's kind of ingrained in our.
Well, that's why I hope that this can change, and I hope that like people who are bosses or who have higher ups, they understand the need for rest, the need for fresh ideas, because you don't. A lot of people say, well, I mean, this is the recipe, right? Hard work, 10,000 hours. I mean, even we have an episode on 10,000 hours, but that 10,000 hours doesn't have to come all in one day. And it really is important, I think, to set limits and to understand when it becomes a problem. Like a big one that a lot of people say, I'm passionate, right? That's I'm passionate. That's the excuse. I'm passionate. How can that be wrong?
Right. I mean,
I think what do you say to that?
I think there's two points that we can talk about, and I mean, one is definitely the difference between the passion and the addiction, but also I think one thing that you mentioned now a couple of times, and which I definitely want to talk about, is that if I work long hours, does that mean I'm a workaholic? Because this is like, again, like we mentioned it so many times, like how much you're supposed to work in school, kind of the things you put yourself through. And I think there's these issues are related, right? It's the passion that makes you go into a flow state, right? And that kind of, and suddenly you don't notice anymore how many hours are passing, right? And that's how these two are related. But I think there's a big difference, right? And long working hours does not necessarily mean that you are completely obsessed about work and you're crazy about work. So long hours does not make you a workaholic. I think that you can work 16 hours a day and you can be completely happy with it, right? If you think that you spend this time on meaningful work for you, and you don't get stressed out over it, right? If you still,
I think that's the key, right?
If you still have a good sleep at night and you feel refreshed and you can't wait to get up in the morning to like do your day's work, right? And that's great. And I think at some point in our careers we were at that stage, right? And there was this passion that was driving us forward. So do not, I mean, if you work long hours and you're kind of used to that, do not despair right away, right? It still takes, you still need to ask yourself some questions though, but I think...
I have so for me, I mean, I think that's definitely touching on the right areas, and that's a good question, right? Whether, if you're working a lot of hours, whether you're a workaholic. And no, I think I agree with you. I think that it's not, if you're happy and all that, but I would say this, there needs to be balance. if there's no balance, if you're working 18 hours a day and you're sleeping the rest and that's it, and you say, well, I'm happy, you really have to dig in there and say, well, are you really happy? What's making your life completely out of whack like that? Because that is not balance, though. You got to know. Working harder or more hours is okay, but you need to balance it with something else, because if it's just work and sleep, that is not a balanced life. And I think at some point it will catch up to you, and that is a sign of an addiction, because you're using the excuses. It's like saying I smoke crack because it feels good, you know. Like, well, for that person, they think they're not an addict. It's just something to look at. Like, I can't tell you on a psychological sense, like, you know, otherwise I wouldn't be an artist. But I do see it as a problem, because I used to say that I'm passionate. I used to tell my wife that I'm passionate. It's passion, man. And the more she studied psychology, the more she's like, no, it's not. And if you dig in there deep enough, and if it's that out of whack, right? We're not talking like, oh, I worked 10 hours today and, you know, I spent this time with my family and I really enjoyed it and I had good sleep. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking the person who's working 18 hours a day and just sleeps and eats like instant noodle and then they're right back to work, you know, like, oh, I'm passionate. Are you really? Like, is there something behind that? You know,
there was an interesting article here that we read, and it kind of dives a little bit into the difference between passion and addiction, right? I mean, and I think they kind of differentiate it a little bit. Just like I'm just reading some part of it here. Like passion is like it's like divine fire. It enlivens and makes it holy. It gives light and yields inspiration. Right? It's generous, and whereas addiction is ego-driven and self-centered. Right? Addiction is a thief, whereas passion gives you something. Right? I mean, it's quite high-level kind of stuff, but I think in general we can say that passion gives you like freedom and joy, and you feel like you're speaking like you're speaking to your true self and to your values, right? Whereas addiction is more like it's like what did I write here? I mean,
well,
it's like
it robs you.
It robs you. It takes from you, right? It's purely like. If you don't do the work, you kind of feel empty inside, and you need to kind of fill that emptiness, right? And that's interesting. And I'm wondering though, right? I mean, and I that's purely like a discussion point or something that maybe we can ask our audiences. I mean, I don't know, like is the video game industry and movie industry, is that kind of like hijacking our passion? And like profiting from our passion, because so many people come into it with that and then kind of turning it on its head, and then you crunching like I don't know, like 90% of the year, and I don't know, do they?
Well,
like,
let me ask you,
okay,
so we just kind of defined passion and addiction, and the differences. So tell me, in your view of your own career or where you're at now, is it passion or is it addiction?
Wow, that's a good question. I would definitely tend to the latter one. I recognize when I'm passionate about something, right? I mean, I have that much self-awareness. I can realize when it's like something is like, okay, I'm really into this and I want to do that, right? Of course, it used to be more that these both overlap, right? There's always parts of a project that you absolutely hate and you don't want to do, but you just do it because you're professional. But then there were parts of it which really excite you and you kind of work together on something bigger, and that's cool. But over the years, it definitely shifts towards just being a job kind of thing, and the passion element, you don't even think about it anymore. You don't ask yourself, or at least I don't ask myself that question, like, is this project something I'm passionate about? Right? Because you say like, oh, it's a client project. Why would I be passionate about anything like that, right? But I think if your addiction meter like goes so high and your passion meter is empty, then you have a problem as an artist. I think there's a problem as an artist.
Interesting.
And I'm desperately trying to figure out how to balance out this stuff, right? And how to view work as not being this addictive thing. And then maybe we can kind of segue into kind of a few kind of solutions. It's not a solution. It's kind of like, what can you suggestion? What can you do if you like? I mean, I think the first step that you wrote down is like, you need to realize that there is a problem, right? Self-awareness.
Well, let me, before we get to that, I just want to say, like, since I asked you the question between, passion and addiction, I'll just answer my own question real quick, because, when you were talking, I was like thinking to myself, addiction or passion. And I'll tell you, I don't know why I can be so clear on this, but basically everything is pretty much ego-driven addiction, except for the short film that I did. Really, I can really sit down and say that was passion, because it wasn't like, I had balance in my life, and this is my thinking, right? And I loved what I did, and it was a pure expression of, I didn't care what people think, so I wasn't trying to get people's approval. I was just trying to work something out within myself, and that's why it felt so right. No one telling me what to do, and so, and I didn't have to answer, like any client emails or do anything. I didn't have to please anyone. So, and I didn't work like 20 hours a day either. It was a healthy amount of time with good support. So, I mean, for me, that was like pure passion, and that's why I'm doing another one now, because it just felt so right, but everything else had some form of addiction to it. And I have definitely been looking into it. So anyway, that's that. But yeah, I mean, we're saying all this stuff, is there suggestions for how to, recognize it, what to do about it, and you. I mean,
I think again, that's what you wrote. That, I mean, what I agree with is that you need to maybe ask yourself these questions we asked in the beginning, right? I mean, are you feeling guilty? Are you getting jittery hands when you don't answer your emails? Do you like check your phone all the time? You
have one in there that you didn't say that I think is really good. Do you have bad drinking habits?
Bad drinking.
That is because I see a lot of people that, were going out at lunch and drinking.
Jesus.
And I was like, why are people drinking? And then there's hard liquor in the fridge at work, and I'm like, whoa, what? And now you look back, it's like they need it to cope. So I'm just saying, that's
a good point. Yeah, it can take physical dimensions, this addiction, right? It definitely, even though you think it's just, I can just stop working, right? But it's not as easy as that, right? So I mean, that's one point, right? And it sometimes it takes more kind of self-awareness and self-reflection to realize it, and to say to yourself and to your loved ones that you have a problem. And I mean, there's suggestions that are either kind of like that you can work out within yourself. Others the way you maybe want to get some help. And I mean, I think having a more structured workday and setting yourself boundaries, especially as a freelancer, I think is very important, that you set yourself very clear limitations on when you check your emails, like until what time, on which work days, when on which days during the week, I mean, or like from when to when you work, right? Instead of saying like, I'm just going to work today, and then it's going to take however long it needs until I'm done, right? Because the work will just automatically expand and will take up all your time if you're not careful. It's different when you really try to make, and there's a couple of really great books that I can recommend you guys that deal with that you make sure that you account for every minute of your day, and you need to know what you're doing at any given point during the day. That a lot of the issues of you idling and being unproductive and everything comes from the fact that you're not 100% sure what you're supposed to do at any given point. And that doesn't mean that you have to follow like a very strict kind of framework, or that you're like stuck in doing the things the same way all the time. It's just that you don't have to sit there and you have to make a decision about what to do next. It's like you thought about it the day before, you planned out your day, and you know exactly that at this point you need to do this kind of work, which can help you become a lot more efficient, and can give you in the end, it can kind of give you back some time. Another thing is, I think that is very true for me, is that, well, for a long time was that like having hobbies actually. And it doesn't really matter if you have like a super interesting hobby, but it's purely about the fact that if you don't have a hobby, the work can expand however long it wants to. But if you know that at 8 p.m. or at 6 p.m. Or at, let's say 7 p.m. after dinner, whatever, I'm meeting my soccer team, and we're going for practice every Tuesday and Friday. Like, that's set. Everybody is there, right? Or you do, I don't know, other kind of sports, or you go photography, or you do whatever, right? Something that requires you to be at a certain place at a certain time, and then you have no choice but to finish your work before, have dinner, and then go do that thing, right? And it's of course good if you're really passionate about that hobby, because it will kind of push you towards making sure you attend whatever that is, right? Whether, again, it's sports or creative or whatever, right? Maybe there's also people from the from that are not artists and are still listening to the podcast, and that want to get some like creativity into it, right? If you're passionate about art and you're an accountant, and that you're like, okay, I'm part of this like art group or whatever, and I need to make sure that I'm going there, right? Instead of sitting over my spreadsheets and doing whatever. So I think that can help. Something that you look forward to, that other people hold you accountable to, right? And I mean, I have a couple of more that I wrote down here that I think are quite helpful. That we talked about the issue that we work in an industry where working long hours and being 100% dedicated to the work up to unhealthy levels is considered normal. So one of the ways how you can change that, if you want to change that, that is that you should surround yourself with people that are not workaholics. I mean, that sounds very stupid and straightforward, but you need to surround yourself. You need to find a group of people where workaholism is not seen as normal, where working these crazy hours is not normal, because the group of people that you hang out with, they will kind of dictate what is normal and what is not. If it's like a super fit group of like cyclists or whatever, they will think that cycling 2 hours every morning is a normal thing. And over time, if you want to hang out with these people, you will, before long, you will start cycling as well, right? And in the same way, again, the same way that if you want to become like somebody who steps out of that workaholism, be in a group where workaholism is not the norm, and that can really make a big impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And that's, in this industry, it's hard. Like I was telling you, it's not easy, but you have to try. And maybe you do find some people, and maybe it means that job pays a little less.
Of course.
Maybe it's worth it.
To be honest, like, so, I mean, in your example, for example, I mean, you have your wife, and your wife thinks that what you do is not normal and you should stop it, right? And because you want to be part of that group, which includes your wife, you stop working yourself into the ground, right? So in that sense,
and that's part of why we're together.
Exactly,
I think
right.
She does complement that, and I'm sure the same for you. Another thing, which I've begun seeing a therapist, and I have been seeing a therapist for a while. Obviously, a lot of things are band-aids, right? Setting hours and all that. These are all band-aids to hopefully help you, but the problem is if you don't understand the reason behind why you're doing certain things, you'll never really fix the problem, and it'll always be a struggle. And like I said, I really think for me, seeing a therapist has been the best thing ever. And there really is no downside to it. I think everybody should see one, whether they are workaholics or not. They should see one because it's just great to, we all have our issues and things that, that need to be heard, and a professional person can definitely help you see a lot of insights. But for me, it doesn't have to be a therapist, but I would say look at the reason why you're addicted. And go from that point of view. That's how you're really going to solve that problem. But obviously everybody has different reasons why. We're just trying to shed light onto a problem that I think a lot of people are. I mean, even now I hear so much. It's just people are proud. We work our ass off. We do it. We didn't even sleep. Like, that is not something that should be promoted, because it's just, in my opinion, not a healthy way to live. And I just wanted to put it out there, put the seed out there, see who agrees, who thinks, hey, maybe I do have some, because everybody's asking the question of burnout, but they're not looking at workaholism, which is weird, and I didn't even think about this a year ago when we did the episode, because I didn't think about it. But now it's like, guess where it's coming from? I mean, it's very clear. Like, so you're just backtracking to where the root of the problem is, and getting to it, and then before long you'll realize you won't burn out. And and it sounds simple, but for me, I'm still struggling and trying to make it work.
And we all do.
But that, yeah. So yeah, to me, that's kind of what it's all about.
Oh, that's great. I think it's a good place to wrap up. So yeah, I mean, I hope this episode didn't come as too like it's all doom and gloom. I think there's plenty of people still who work a lot, but I think they have a very healthy relationship to work. But for all the rest of us, I hope this was the very useful episode. We're going to link to a couple of articles, a couple of books that we read in the last couple of weeks in preparation for this episode, so that you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into certain categories. If you have your own stories of workaholism and your journey through it, please do share them in the comments. And again, if you want us to dive into certain areas even deeper, we can always, I think I can already kind of imagine a couple of like spin-off episodes, like we mentioned, right, with some health professionals, or looking at how women and mothers kind of deal with like crazy hours at work and these kind of things, things we don't really know much about. We can definitely dive into that one if there's enough interest. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in again, and please like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when something new comes out. And we hope you have a great week, and thank you so much. See ya.